The fate of Marcus Reno after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Yesterday, we talked about this disastrous news on the 100th anniversary or the 100th birthday of our country. Blame was starting to circulate. The person that took the direct blame for this particular fiasco was Marcus Reno. He's the one that was blamed for Custer's defeat. So as a result of his ill-fated charge against overwhelming odds and his, quote, hasty retreat to the bluffs, he was blamed for Custer's defeat. And I think unjustly so. Matter of fact, they portray him in the movie Son of the Morning Star as quite a bit wimpier than really what he was. Okay? Anyway, he was charged with the following three things. Cowardice. But I don't want you to worry about the fact you had like 10 minutes to sharpen that pencil. Cowardice. So you can spell it right. He was also charged with dereliction of duty. What's dereliction of duty? Anybody know?
Didn't do his duty?
Didn't do his duty, yeah. Failed to do his duty. Very good. Dereliction of duty and disobeying orders. Now you studied this. I spent a lot of time on this with you kids. I think you've enjoyed it. How many of those would you agree with? Seriously. How many, Santos?
Tim?
What?
What was your question?
How many of these would you agree with? Would you agree with these by knowing what you know about what Reno did? Would anybody agree with number one?
Cowardice a bit.
Possibly. I mean, who would? I mean, come on. You know what I mean? Okay, so he didn't charge in the village like, of course, George Smith. You know what I mean? And whatever. I mean, anybody might have been this a little bit this, don't you think? How about dereliction of duty? Did he do what he wasn't? What would be the dereliction of duty? He did no. He didn't go do what? Support Custer. Okay, maybe that would be it. And that's possible. Should he have went and supported Custer? I'm not sure. I would have under the circumstances. Because he's supposed to protect his wounded. Remember what General Terry said in the movie? Custer, take care of your wounded. How about disobeying orders? I'm trying to think what orders he would have disobeyed.
No, he didn't.
Okay, all right. Well, that's what he was charged with. Now, he was upset about this, so he's the one that requested that court of inquiry. Remember that Benteen testified at? Reno requested a court of inquiry because he didn't think those charges were correct and he wanted to clear his name. Okay? So it was Reno that requested the court of inquiry that came down in Western history as Reno's court of inquiry. And remember that happened in 1879, and he did that because he wanted to clear his name of these charges. Okay, who did testify for him? Benteen. And when it was all over, the hearings did clear Reno of the charges. It cleared him of these charges. So you think to yourself, his life was awesome. Man, after that it was awesome. Okay? It was, things became worse for poor Reno. I'm going to give you 6 examples of how his life became worse after this court of inquiry. So 6 reasons why things came worse for Reno. First of all, friends that he thought were friends and now considered themselves former friends avoided him. So people that were friends of his prior to this campaign of 1876 now did not friend him. They left him. So he didn't have a lot of friends. So his former friends avoided him. The second thing that happened was sad is his wife died. His wife passed away. The third thing that was sad is his only son moved far away from him, kind of in a distant part of the country, so he didn't have any family around him. His son moved far away from him. I don't think his son moved far away from him because he didn't love his dad. It's possible to have that name. How'd you like to be Lee Harvey Oswald's daughters in 1963? You see what I'm saying? Okay, so his only son moved to a distant part of the country. Number 4, as Caleb said, he began to drink heavily, which led to depression. So number 4, he began to drink heavily and became very depressed. Well, kind of list of my setup for number 5. A lot of people in the military weren't real happy that he got off kind of clean on that court of inquiry. So he got convicted of what they called a flimsy morals charge, and he was dishonorably discharged from the Army. That actually is number 5. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army. Why? Because he was convicted on what they considered a very flimsy morals charge, something he did that was supposed to be immoral, and they just kind of went after him because they didn't like him. And as a result of that, he was dishonorably discharged. And if things aren't bad enough for you, he developed, number 6, he developed cancer and died. And was he given a great burial? He was buried in a poor man's grave in Washington, D.C. So he ends up getting cancer and dies, and he's buried in a poor man's grave in Washington, D.C. He didn't really, get any accolades for anything or whatever. So 6 examples of how things became worse for Reno after the court of inquiry. His former friends avoided him. His wife died. His only son moved to a distant part of the country. He began to drink and became very depressed. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army after a flimsy morals charge against him, and then he developed cancer and ended up dying and was buried in a real just pauper's or poor man's grave in Washington.
Was his body moved?
No.
No.
Well, it was going to be. That's what I'm getting to. Well, after a period of time, his descendants, his family, some interested individuals, historians, some organizations went to work, and eventually he was cleared of all charges, and he was given an honorable discharge. All this happened after he died. Okay, so he died. If you think about it, he died a friendless, broken man, but afterwards, descendants, members of his family down through the years, some people that were interested and didn't feel like he was treated properly after kind of some of the true things came out. Some organizations that supported him finally got him all cleared of charges, and he was reversed to an honorable discharge. Okay, but who got the honorable discharge? He did, but who received it? His family. Okay? Well, then they took him from that lowly, pitiful pauper's grave in Washington, D.C., and they reburied him. This is kind of an interesting story. They reburied him with full military honors at Custer Battlefield National Cemetery, which you'll get a chance to see his grave when we're there. So he was exhumed from that lowly pauper's grave in Washington, D.C., and they buried him with full military honors at Custer Battlefield National Cemetery on September 9th, 1967. Yep.
So, is Benson buried at Custer? No?
And where he's buried? Arlington.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking
Now,
he was buried there.
this is kind of an interesting story because my wife and I obviously didn't know each other in 1967. Okay? We were 9 years old.
Nice.
And my wife, when I was kind of telling her about this many years ago, is when she married a history teacher, her and her father who lived in Warland at the time, took her and she attended that reburial of Marcus Reno. She said she'll never forget that. Her dad wanted to do that and she didn't really understand it. She was 9 and her dad thought it was kind of a cool thing. So my father-in-law took my wife when she was 9 and he was there when they re-entered Major Reno into Custer Battlefield in 1967. My uncle, Theron Dewar, who served in the military, is also buried at Custer Battlefield, not because he served there, obviously, but like Arlington, you can be buried in a national cemetery if you served in the military, and he wished to be buried there. And so he's buried there, and we'll get a chance to see his grave site when we get there. Okay? So unfortunately, that's what happened with Marcus Reno. Did not have a real positive life. Although he was cleared and would feel good about it, he never lived to see it. Okay? Libby Custer. We'll finish with Libby. Whatever became of Libby Custer? Libby Custer outlived her husband by 57 years and never remarried. Okay? She outlived her husband by 57 years, never remarried.
How old was she when she died?
I'll tell you, we'll get to that. Now, following her husband's death, a certain person actually charged her husband responsible for all of those men's lives lost at Little Bighorn. Could Reno be charged with all the lives lost? No. Somebody had to be, and Custer did. Who was the man that made it clear that he thought Custer was responsible? No? Good guess.
Grant.
President Grant. And following her husband's death, Libby learned that President Grant charged him responsible for the loss of his men's lives at the Little Bighorn. And what she spent basically the rest of her life doing was defending her husband's reputation and transforming him into a hero. She dedicated her life to memorializing her husband, okay? Now, if she's going to work entirely to defend her husband's reputation, who is she going to have to attack? She isn't going to attack the President of the United States, probably. Who's she going to attack and say they were cowards? They. Reno and Benteen. So she verbally attacked both Reno and Benteen, called them cowards, said they should have supported her husband by providing support at Custer Hill, although we all know in reality that would have meant disaster for them as well, right? But she went on the attack, attacking both Reno and Benteen for their cowardice and not providing support for her husband at Custer Hill. Spent her whole life trying to get her husband back on the good side of things.
So Libby ruined Reno's life.
Oh, I don't know if she wrote it. She was after Benteen too, you know what I mean? Well, in 1885, she published a book. What was it entitled?
Do you have one?
Yeah, Boots and Saddles. Now go on eBay, we may do this when I get done with the lecture, and see what a first edition, first printing of Boots and Saddles is worth. This copyright, see this kind of cool picture of Custer. 1885. This is copyright 1885 by Harper and Brothers. This is a first edition, first printing of Boots and Saddles. Okay, that book basically was about, she spent the time writing the book, Boots and Saddles, portraying her husband as an exemplary son, an exemplary brother, husband, and commanding officer. So it was a book that really promoted her husband as a great, what?
So that book is over 100 years old?
1885, yeah. Almost a lot more than 100, way over 100 years old. Way, 1885, 1995, 2005, 130 years old.
That book right there?
Yeah. Now, she became very wealthy. And she had access to the President of the United States anytime she wanted, not so much grant. But she was very well liked in Washington. She became very wealthy. If she wanted to go see the President, she showed up at the White House and the President let her in. She became very popular after her husband's death. And she worked very diligently after getting that power to put together monuments both at West Point and at the battlefield to honor her husband. Okay? So she had spent her entire 57 years pretty much after her husband's death working very hard to restore his reputation and put up monuments and that type of thing. Well, on April 4th, 1933, at the age of 93, Libby Custer passed away.
What's up with everybody dying?
Yep. April 4th, 1933, at the age of 93, Libby Custer, Elizabeth Bacon Custer, died.
Bacon?
Her name is Elizabeth Bacon Custer.
That's cool.
Because her last name was Bacon. So
Now, she could not at first be buried next to her husband. Where's her husband buried?
West Point.
West Point. There was a law stating that women could not be buried there because it was a men's military institution. So when she died, they changed the law so that women could be buried at West Point so that she could be buried next to her husband. That's where she's at. Okay, that is the end of the note. What we're going to do now is we're going to watch that video, but first we might get on the line and just see what first edition, first printing of Boots and Saddles is worth if they have any available. Okay?
You know, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering this. Why is today not walking?
What's that?